morning we come to the end of the story of Moses. We have been reading about Moses for quite a while. The first 5 books of the Bible are basically his story. The first book, Genesis, says, okay, this is how everything started. This is what God did. This is how we got to the point where this guy, where the Hebrews ended up in Egypt. And Exodus starts out with a baby being born, drawn out of the water, and named Moses. And the rest of the Pentateuch, or the Torah, is the story of Moses. He leads the people. He had been leading them through the desert for 40 years. If you remember, at the beginning of the sojourn, they went to the mountain. They got the 10 Commandments, Mount Moriah, or Mount Sinai, depending on your preference. And they went up to the border of the Promised Land. They were right there. And they sent spies in to see, what's this like? What's this land like? What are the people who are living there like? We're going to have to take the land. They're not going to give it up. We're going to have to fight. You know, what kind of people are these? So they send spies in, and the spies come back and say, oh, yeah, there's milk and honey in the land now, but the people are giants. They're huge. We'll never be able to beat them. Joshua's with them. He says, well, yeah, we can. We got God with us. We can go in. We can take the land. God promised us. We can count on God's promises. Let's go. Oh, no, we're afraid. Everybody got afraid. And they did not want to go into the land. They did not want to trust that God would do what God had promised. And so God got pretty mad. He was ready to wipe them all out. And he made them wander in the desert for 40 years. And the reason was so that that entire generation, the adults, would die. And that then their kids would be the ones who were wandering around. And the kids are the ones that Moses is with at the entrance to the Promised Land. Now, if you remember when the Israelites were wandering in the desert, there were 2 incidences where people grumbled for water. In the first, God said, take the staff that's in your hand, go and stand in front of this rock at this place, hit the rock with your staff, and water will flow from the rock, and there will be water for the people and the herds and the whole 9 yards. But there was a second incident too, where God said, go, you and Joshua, and go and stand in front of this rock, and I will make water flow from it. Well, as was the case with the Israelites, they were sitting there complaining to Moses and telling him how horrible he is and how he brought them out to die and all this kind of stuff. And he gets all upset, and he takes his staff and he strikes the rock twice, and water flowed out. So that wasn't what God told him to do. God was, go there, stand there in front of the rock, and I will make it flow water. And then people will know that I am God who provides. Because if nothing happened to the rock, if nothing touched it, how could water possibly have come from it? There's only one way, by God. But when Moses hit it, it kind of undermined it. So when they got to the Promised Land, God said, here's the land and I'll show it to you, but you're not going to be allowed to go in because of this transgression that you committed, this sin. So they took him up on a mountain and showed him the entire land. Before he went, he laid hands on Joshua, commissioned him to be the leader of the people in Moses' stead, give him a portion of his spirit, gave him the staff, the whole 9 yards. Moses goes up on a mountain, and God shows him the entire Promised Land, from the Mediterranean over to the Jordan, the deserts, the mountains, the whole thing. And then it says Moses died there and was buried by God. And to this day, no one knows the burial place. See, there was a custom in Egypt. And now this was the second generation, so they might not have felt the same attachment to that custom as parents did, but it was handed down. We do that. We hand down traditions to our kids. And there was a tradition in Egypt of worshiping the dead. And so if nobody knows where Moses' grave is, the chance of them setting up some kind of shrine and doing some kind of worship thing is gone. So Moses was buried where no one knows. Now, Moses, it also says in this passage that since Moses, there has not arisen a prophet like him in all Israel, one who knew God and spoke to God face to face. And he's lifted up in the closing of this passage from Deuteronomy. And you look at that, and you look at all the stuff he did, and you say, well, couldn't God have said, well, yeah, all right, we did this thing wrong, but you know what? You got more checks on the good side of the ledger than you do on the bad side of the ledger. So, yeah, what the heck, you can go in. I mean, the first time I read this story, that was my reaction. Because it doesn't seem quite right. Jesus was talking at one point. And he said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. Moses did not keep the command of God. And there was a consequence for that. The people also needed to know that if you don't follow God's urgings and you don't follow God's commands, there's going to be a downside. And if this didn't teach that lesson, I don't know what would. Lots and lots and lots of laws. All these laws, these 613 laws, came down through the Torah. 10 Commandments as well as all the others. Hard to keep track of something like that. But Jesus really sums it up in a way that can help us to really focus on what we're supposed to be about. Somebody told me a long time ago that the cross represents this very, very well. Jesus said, what is the most important law? You are to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. Love, we're down here, God's up there. And you are to love your neighbor as yourself. Relationship with God, relationship with neighbor. We have a lot of questions sometimes about how we should act in given circumstances. Last night at Coffee with Jesus, we talked about the church's place in the political arena. Should the church be active in politics? Should the church urge people to act in a certain way regarding politics? The way the question was phrased was intentionally provoking, was who should I vote for? It was kind of interesting that very, very few people showed up last night. I don't know if that was because of the haunted house or because they looked at the question and said, I don't like political discussions. But what we talked about was, does the church have a place in the political arena? Now, in the United Methodist Church in particular, it's something that we have been involved in since the days of Wesley, been involved in public policy discussions. Not to advocate for this candidate or that candidate. As a matter of fact, you do that kind of stuff, you lose your tax-exempt status according to the IRS. There are actually 400 pastors who are challenging that in their sermons this morning. I don't think that's proper myself.